Director Ryer is the secretary for the commission. Mr. Secretary, will you call roll?
Robin Allen, I believe is not here. Justin Williams.
Here.
Doug McCoach.
Present.
Marcia Collins.
Here.
The Honorable Eric Costello.
Not yet.
Talib Horn is not here. Claudia Jolin.
Here.
Eric Stevenson.
Here.
And Sean Davis.
Here, before we roll into the agenda, I'd like to, Mr. Priebus, would you come forward, please?
Mike?
Oh, thank you. Forget my mic. Igor's gonna kill me. So Tom Priebus rolled off of the Planning Commission back, a couple meetings ago. Yeah, a couple of meetings ago. And we really wanted to make sure that we recognize Tom for 6 years of service on the commission, 6 years of dedication to the city as a resident member, and we greatly appreciate it. So on behalf of the mayor, the planning director, and the planning commission, we'd like to present you with a certificate of recognition signed by the mayor. Wow. Thank you very much for all of your great work. Now, on a personal note, it was pretty widely understood by at least everybody on the commission that Tom and I would really, really enjoy each other's conversation and point of view. And I always respected Tom for his honesty, for his forthrighteousness, and for really thinking about what was best for the citizens of Baltimore. So thank you very much,
Really
Tom.
appreciate that. Thank you. And I really enjoyed my time working with you all and appreciated the opportunity to serve.
Thank you again. Before you leave. Make sure I give you the honor.
Oh, yeah, it's really important. Yeah. My desk drawer with this. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
All right, moving back to the agenda, we have before us the August 31st, 2023 meeting minutes. Does anybody have any questions or comments regarding those? I only have one. On item number 12, I believe we had a vote on waiving the notice, the posting requirement.
Yeah, I have that written. I just normally don't transcribe those for the formal notice, but if you'd like to have that in the minutes, I can easily add that.
If you would just amend it to identify that we waived posting unanimously. Okay, with that, is there any other questions, comments? Hearing none, do I have a motion?
Move to accept.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Second.
Thank you, Vice Chair Stevenson. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? With the consent agenda, CIP transfers, there's 2 Board of Estimate meetings. The first one was from September 6th. It had a walloping 23 items on it, most of which were identified as not consistent with the CIP, but for very good reasons. So anybody have any questions or comments regarding the September 6th BOE meeting or CIP transfers? Hearing none, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Commissioner Collins. Second?
Second.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
I have a question, not specific. You noted that many of these are not consistent, and that is, I think, because they're coming from an unallocated reserve.
Yes.
What is from the budget process, I don't recall committing money to an unallocated fund, so what is that really?
That's a great question. And to help us address that question, I would like to ask Ms. Kristen Ahern, if you can. If you would. Either Mr. Quash will come out and yell at you as opposed to me.
These are typically, some of those were bulk accounts, so we did budget it in bulk, like for a resurfacing reserve, and it's going to resurfacing, but the specifics weren't laid out when we adopted, so that's why I marked them as non-consistent. The unallocated reserves are an accounting function where if funds are left over in a project, when the project closes out, they're moved into an agency's unallocated reserve. Or if there are state appropriations where we thought we would get a state grant for a project, but the project or the grant wasn't awarded, it will be moved out of the project, so the agency can't use those you can't spend against a grant that we don't have. It gets moved into an unallocated reserve.
Do we see that when we get to the CIP process and agencies are asking for money, do we get to see the balance of their unallocated reserves?
We could build that in, yes.
That'd be good.
Typically, it's not, I think, and forgive me, I got these done early, so I can't remember exactly what they are, but,
There's a bunch of them,
A
Chris.
lot of these are CDBG.
okay, and that's a function of the way that HCD gets, I think, the CDBG grants. They budget it into an unallocated, and then once awarded by the feds, once they get specifics, they move it into those specific accounts that were approved, for projects that were approved by the federal government. But I can follow up with more details, especially on CDBG, but on the unallocated accounts for this year.
Cool, great, thank you.
Most of it does tend to be old state and federal appropriations where a grant didn't come through.
It's just when we're allocating our limited capital budgets, we should be aware if agencies are sitting on reserves and
Agreed.
others are not,
Yes.
when we're prioritizing.
Underneath it says not
against
consistent.
General fund.
Yep. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Agreed.
Thanks, Kristen. We have a motion seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? We also have the September 20th Board of Estimate meeting where there were 3 CIP transfers. Any questions or comments regarding those? Hearing none, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Commissioner Collins. Second.
Second.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Williams. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Item number 4, a minor change and revised final design approval of Stadium Place Plan Unit Development, PD number 102, Village Center at Stadium Place signage plan in the 14th District has been postponed. So we'll not take a vote on that. I'm sure it'll be back on our agenda at some point in the near future. Number 5 is a minor change and revised final design approval for PUD number 57, the Children's Hospital in the 14th District. They're adding 5 parking spaces and removing 2 trees and replacing those with 3 new trees. Are there any questions or comments regarding this? Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve?
Thank you, Vice Chair Stevenson. Have a second? Thank you. Jolin? Commissioner Jolin? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Finally, on the consent agenda, this is something that Eric had sent out to us yesterday. It's a revised schedule for the upcoming CIP presentations. It was highlighted that we're going to move the CIP agency presentations the first day, which is our all-day, to, thanks, Pete, to January 18th. And then the following Thursday, we're going to have the additional agency presentations and then our regular meeting. We talked about this to push it back to give the agencies a little bit more time after the holidays. Coming out of the holidays, you'll remember that last year there was a lot of information that was really, really quick. It was like the first week of January, and they were, everybody's coming out of the holidays trying to, deal with all that. So we were able to accommodate, push that back a little bit to give everybody a little bit more time. So anybody have any questions or comments regarding those scheduling modifications? Hearing none, do I have a motion?
Move to adopt.
Thank you, Commissioner Collins. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner McCoach. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Turning it over to Mr. Secretary to talk about our first regular agenda item.
First regular agenda item is a minor change in revised final design approval for, nope, sorry. Is City Council number 23-0407, zoning discontinuance or abandonment of a non-conforming use citywide. Eric Tisa will present.
Good afternoon. You've heard the caption. I want to recognize the sponsor. You moved a little bit. Councilmember Ramos is here with us today. This is not super complicated. It's adding a new section in Title 18 of the zoning code to add a reporting function for the zoning administrator. The fast version is when there are non-conforming uses, that is a use that was approved lawfully at some point in time, and because either the zoning district changed out from under it or the use mix in the code changed, for whatever reason, that lawfully approved use can no longer be created as a new use in that district, and so it's non-conforming. So you get to keep it as long as it stays in operation, but if it ceases for 12 months or greater, then you lose that, and now you have to follow the rules as they are now for that particular district. The challenge becomes, how does one prove a negative? How do you show that that has not been there for 12 months? One of the easiest ways is by way of a vacant building notice, because that is proof positive that a building is vacant for 12 months. Time burns off. Easy. What gets to be a bit more of a challenge is, how do you document if the building is not fully vacant, but that non-conforming portion of the building is not in action? This formalizes a reporting function to help guide the public in what they should provide to the zoning administrator to help document that, and then charges him with going out to investigate to corroborate that evidence, and if so, then that non-conforming use can be extinguished. So it's basically formalizing a process that has been informal up to this point in time. In speaking with legislative staff at Department of Community Housing Community Development, they will have some friendly amendments to this, but they're generally supportive. The zoning administrator is under HCD, it's their function, so there's not anticipated to be any difficulty in incorporating this. So with that, staff recommends approval.
Are there any questions for Mr. Tisa? Commissioner McCoy?
Actually, I had one question. Related to the tracking of this, is this all digitally managed? Or do you have a staff position necessary with a guy with a big sheath of notes?
I am thankful that unlike most jurisdictions, zoning is not under planning, it's under housing. So this is the personal headache of the zoning administrator. Now, they're gonna have to figure this out, and that's actually, I understand it's not fully baked, but that's gonna be part of the nature of some of the amendments of, how to report it in a form that they need, and they're gonna have to figure out how to record that and how to handle it, because it'll be a new business process. But that's gonna be up to housing to figure out.
So the presumption is this is within their administrative budgets?
Oh, they have zoning inspectors, yes. This is a thing that they have been doing in maybe not as well documented of a form to date. But so incorporating this administratively should not be complicated.
Deputy Mayor Williams?
I guess for the sponsor, if she's speaking, is do we look at the best practice or any practices for other jurisdictions? Just because what I'm thinking obviously makes sense, but thinking about the correlation between like activity, like it's just getting a permit considered activity for purposes of abandonment. So there's like probably pros and cons to accepting that and then what that means. So just thinking through like the full picture of the issues surrounding this.
Right, so, and was that a question for me or for?
I guess either. Well,
I can
for
take a
you,
swing
since
at
you're
it.
here. Sure.
Sure. So this has historically been part of the problem, right? So if I own, let's just say, because the typical example is a business that's a non-conforming use in a residential area. If I am infrequently open, even one day in that 12 months, in theory, I still have right to keep that. Now, if you're a concerned resident in the area, how do you prove a negative? How do you prove that something has not been in operation? And that's the challenge, right? So that's what I think the guidance in here is intended to provide to the public of what you should try and give to the zoning office, where it is, the description, when you last saw it in action, any kind of statement to corroborate that. That's what they're looking for, is that kind of evidence to show, no, this really has been locked and nothing has been moving. I mean, in theory, the best evidence would be I go out there every day and take a picture of it at the same time and place, you know what I mean? To show that there's nothing moving there, but that's the challenge that we have.
Yeah, I guess it, well, I guess, yeah, I get the background. Yeah, sure, I guess, well, yeah, I don't know if in planning staff and reviewing this, if you had a view of what other jurisdictions do or how they treat this under their zoning codes.
No, I didn't go to that length. I mean, it always comes down to inspections, right? In most cases, it's not something that gets incredibly argued, but on occasion it does, and that's when it kind of bites you because you don't have that positive evidence that it's not in
Yeah, that's where I was
operation.
going with it and thinking out loud, and not that I have a strong position, but thinking, because it is like a property right that would be abridged.
Now, the only difference, because I've talked about discontinuance, because that's the more complicated, I'll point out it says discontinued or abandoned. Now, if I had that same non-conforming commercial use and I gut the whole first floor of that building and all the furniture and fixtures are gone, that's abandonment, that's instant.
Right, so I'm thinking about discontinuance, but I guess on the contrary, if a report's filed and then some notice goes to the property owner saying there's been a report filed and say, wait, no, actually, I'm waiting to get financing for my new cafe or something, so then,
Right, so in theory, if you were the owner and the city says, dear, use owner, you are no longer in operation, you were discontinued or abandoned, if you wanted to challenge that, it would be a negative appeal and be heard by the zoning board. So there is a path to argue that and weigh the evidence. It's not just an instant decision with no point of return.
right, so that's why I was wondering, I'm looking at the existing code, is like, are we providing for a final decision that could be appealed?
It should be, because it would be a decision of the zoning administrator that it is indeed discontinued, and that would be appealable.
Yeah. Was this a full,
That's the change in the bill there. It would be just a general challenge function that exists in the zoning code,
yeah,
generally for anyone who's aggrieved by a decision of the zoning administrator.
right, so I'm wondering if this should be like a, I don't know, subsection C4 that says
If I'm missing anything.
that the zoning administrator should make a final determination or something to that effect, because right now it says he's supposed to investigate, but then I guess make a decision, I guess would be the next step ostensibly. Like someone, him or whatever, BMZ, someone should decide based on review of the evidence that there
I guess
is,
it's implied, but it's maybe not. Sure.
that's what I'm thinking about what other
No, and
jurisdictions do.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I mean,
Real quick.
oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, may I have permission to speak?
No, I just want you to identify yourself.
Sure.
We all know who you are, but for our audience.
Sure, I'm Councilwoman Odette Ramos, 14th District. And also for the record, the previous agenda item is not in the 14th, it's in the 6th. You fix it on there, but he said it as the 14th, so. Anyway, so in this particular case, what we're trying to do here is, I can just give you an example. For instance, 2643 Cecil, it does not have a VBN on it, but it's been very clear to the residents and it's been documented that the use, which was a liquor store at one point, and they're in Coldstream Homestead Montebello, we don't have neighborhood commercial, and that's a vestige of my predecessor. And so when they asked for being able to have a store again, it was a whole big deal trying to figure out what documentation was needed and what can be done to make sure that the residents could document that that had been a discontinued use and they could not have the same use. Right. So working with DHCD on this language is what we came up with so that there's clear guidance, both for the zoning administrator and the community to describe use. And to the deputy mayor's point about, zoning administrator to investigate, that's the investigation. I don't have I can just look it up in the zoning code where it goes, but Mr. Tiso is correct that there would be a final decision and then it can be appealable. So there is still that due process piece.
I think what Deputy Mayor's suggesting is, since this is a completely separate section of the zoning code now, that it would have a C4 that says the zoning administrator shall make a final determination.
I'm open to that amendment. And the DHCD amendments didn't include that. They included having a form. And then there was another technical amendment. And so we're just working through that because I don't want to have additional obstacles for the community. So we're trying
No,
to
I mean,
figure that out.
clearly, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but the intent of your bill is, heretofore, it's been, kind of weighed towards the non-conforming use.
Correct.
To the disadvantage of, citizens that surround that use that, may be held in abeyance based on the law. Now you're giving those people
Correct.
the opportunity to, to move forward with a process that documents it. Totally cool, legitimate by me, but.
And I can make a note of Deputy Mayor's thoughts and be open to an amendment.
And I think, yeah, we'd just probably include that if, when we make our motion.
Sure.
Anything else, Deputy Mayor?
That's all, thanks.
Commissioner John? Councilman Costello? Vice Chair Stevenson?
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Collins?
I was just thinking about the practicality. I had my back to everybody,
fine.
but think about the practicalities of it. At least HCD does have various systems that are in place now that could possibly be the way in which you track or record. I'm thinking about CodeMap or some of their other uses that they have there. And then that would also, if it were in, say, CodeMap, for example, that's open to anyone to look at it and to see what's happening with that particular address. But I agree that tracking and recognizing that tracking is going to be the challenge. Do you go out periodically and check some of these, or what do you do? So I appreciate what you're doing here. I think it is important to have it reflected in the code, but it will be a little challenging when we get going. But thank you so much.
Yeah, and to the commissioner's point, I think that, we needed a process because before it was just, does it have a VBN or not? And we know that that's not accurate because not every property is eligible for a VBN. So we were trying to come up with a way that can also be used for that as well.
Well, you could also have it occupied, but it could be doing something totally different.
Correct.
Yeah, thank you.
And then also to your point about CodeMap, I am a daily, minute-by-minute user of CodeMap. My understanding is that the uses are not mapped on there, and it would be wonderful for them to do that, but it is not on there now. Because then that would actually help, because then we can see when the use was established, and then can even track from there. So, but we don't have that yet. That's a great suggestion. I've been working with CodeMap on adding the folks at CodeMap adding a couple of other things, because we'd love to have that be like a one-stop for everything. But that's a good point.
I'd just like to second that suggestion. That'd be a critical tool for residents. And I just want to add, I hope we can be careful to make sure that this doesn't unintentionally transfer the burden of proof or responsibility to the residents.
Yep.
Like we see sometimes with 311 stuff, and then, it sits for 6 months, but because no one reported it, they get another 12 months, so.
Right, that is definitely the challenge that we're already still facing, right? Is that the burden of proof is still on the resident. So I'm hoping that this is a balance, but I definitely understand and we'll work with the zoning administrator's office on that too. Thank you.
I just had one question, and I'm not sure if it's you, Councilwoman, or you, Eric, to ask. What's the lowest threshold of activity? A lot of times you'll have a building which appears abandoned. What would prevent an owner to throw up a for lease sign and say, I'm good for a year because I've posted a sign and it's active in the commercial marketplace?
I think, not to answer for the councilwoman, but in response to that and some of the deputy mayor's questions, we're talking about use. So these development functions of permits, financing, all that sort of stuff, if it's not
In
active,
use.
open for business being used, I would think that that's the threshold we're looking for.
That's the
Perfect.
interpretation of the zoning code that I have as well.
Okay.
Yes, okay.
Well, there is case law, I've worked on this on a couple of different instances, not in that neighborhood though, where the permit filing was sufficient to be activity that kept the use active. I mean, yeah, I guess it depends, and maybe it's, yeah, I guess there's pros and cons from a policy perspective to think through. Like, you don't want to disincentivize commercial corridors. It's hard enough in some areas to get activity and to make them go through another BMZA process, but in this neighborhood, they don't want that.
Well, just remember that we're just talking about nonconformance. We're not talking about conditional uses.
Right. Although,
So-
that's where I guess, yeah, I'm glad you raised that. That was my concern too, was thinking about the interplay between the two. Like because there's a similar provision that if you haven't had activity within a certain, like 1 or 2 years for conditional use, the conditional use goes away, you have to get it back again. And so maybe that's.
We clarified that in the modifications that we did, correct? Did we clarify that?
I can't pull it up now to look, but we can look into that.
Yeah, so this is strictly on nonconformance.
So real quickly, to your point, a conditional use is prescribed under the law as a use which is permitted in that district under conditions, right?
Right.
So it's a little bit different than a non-conforming use. Trying to go back in and get a conditional use is different than,
I agree, it should be, they are treated, should be treated differently. With the provision of 5-408, for example, says a discontinued conditional use for 2 years or more lapses and is void. You have to go back and get a new one.
right.
And so just thinking through,
But you can't go back and get a new,
I agree. But I wanted to just
Non-conforming
think, but so
use.
thinking through, and I get, and maybe non-conform, maybe we can put a provision in saying non-conforming uses are disfavored anyway by law and by policy, so we can be more strict and have a presumption against resuming the activity versus a conditional use where we aren't as worried about the ongoing use being performed there.
I mean, at the end of the day, hopefully this is really not used a hell of a lot, but now you have the ammunition in your, your toolkit if you need it.
Right, and it gives the zoning administrator, if somebody comes to him and says, hey, this is non-conforming use, it has gone away, he could say, well, I don't have any documentation. So go out and get the documentation, right? So rather than just saying, well, it doesn't have a BBN. So it helps, I think, on both sides. And of course, our office will work with our colleagues to, educate folks about this. But I think that, again, it just provides us with a little bit more standard on this. And Deputy Mayor, I see your points and, happy to think it through, but this is just about nonconformance. It is not about conditional uses. That's a whole different thing that we talked about during the zoning code modifications.
Are there any other questions for the councilwoman? Is there anything else that you'd like to say, before you started getting drilled with questions?
No, this is a great discussion, and I really appreciate you're thinking about it, and I would ask for your support.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else here who would like to speak on this agenda item? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Questions, comments, discussion amongst the commission? Hearing none, do I have a motion?
Motion to approve?
Do you want to include any conditions regarding including a requirement that the zoning administrator has to what do we say? Make a decision that would be appealable? You don't have to.
Well, I mean, my understanding from the discourse was that already is a function under the code.
Okay.
We'll take a look at it. Understand the intent.
So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Motion second. Mr. Secretary, will you call roll?
Discussion.
No, go ahead.
Well,
Let's step back.
for discussion before the vote, I don't know, I'm looking at the code and it's sort of academic, I guess it will make a decision, but I guess it'd be, since we're here, and I'm in the position I'm in, I'd like to make it clear that there should be a report after the investigation, make a finding either way. So, that my proposal would be
amendment?
we're amending the motion on the floor to include a recommendation for an amendment that there be a final decision either way made after the investigation within maybe have to prescribe a time period, but there should be a final decision made.
Are you accepting of that amendment?
Yes.
Okay. All Are you accepting as the second of that amendment? I don't want to go through the Roberts rules where, no, we got to vote on this motion and then blah, blah, blah. So we have a motion, it's been seconded as amended. Mr. Secretary.
Yes, thank you. Justin Williams,
Aye, or approve.
Doug McCoach,
Approve.
Marcia Collins,
Approve as amended.
Honorable Eric Costello,
Approve as amended.
Claudia Jolin, Eric Stevenson,
Approve.
and Sean Davis.
Approve. Thank you, Councilwoman.
Thank you very much.
Our next agenda item.
Next agenda item is City Council Bill number 23-0423, renaming city property Cottage Avenue Park to Candy Stripe Park in the 6th Councilmanic District. Eric Tiso will present.
Good afternoon again. This is a fairly incredibly simple item. So this is Cottage Avenue Park in the center of the block. I'll take you through a couple of photos overhead here. There's a playground and some basketball courts. And as we understand it from area residents, that this is actually known locally as Candy Stripe Park and has been so for about 40 years. And that is apparently owing to the fact that early on in the park's lifespan, there were some barriers there that were alternately painted red and white. And so that's what the kids were reminded of as a candy cane, so Candy Stripe Park. So the staff rationale for approval is that if the nearby residents have called it Candy Stripe Park for 40 years, that's good enough for us.
Go back to the photograph real quick. On the right-hand side, or sorry, on the left-hand side of that image is the Plantation Park, so Plantation Park Heights Urban Farm. You gotta stop turning this thing off. Is, on the left side is Plantation Park Heights Urban Farm, and so I've been out there a bunch, and that's exactly what they call it. So, are there any questions for Mr. Tiso? Yes.
Question, a quick one for my institutional knowledge, if you don't mind. How much does it cost the city to rename parks for signs, maps, updating, that sort of thing?
Good question. That would be for Park and Recs to answer. And Carrie and I, who's the community planner for the area, of course, reached out to them to get some of the basic information. And they actually didn't know that this was being introduced. It was a bit of a surprise to them, or at least the folks that she talked to. So I don't have an answer for that, but I can try and get that just out of academic curiosity. Unless you happen to know, Mr. Councilman.
The department.
Next to you.
Cool. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. The Department of Finance is required to perform a fiscal analysis, so that's usually uploaded. So for any one of these, you can just go to the Baltimore City Council website, type in the bill number. It should be listed there. Sometimes finance has done it, other times they have not, but it's usually a minimal cost for something like a park renaming. For a park of this size, if you were to go and rename
Druid Hill.
Druid Hill or Patterson or Herring Run, different story.
And just for record, I mean, we are recommending on this, so we are the recommending body back to the council, not the final determinant. Okay? Are there any other questions for Mr. Tiso on this? Hearing none, do I have a motion?
Move approval.
Thank you, Councilman. I have a second.
Second.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Mr. Secretary, will you call roll?
Certainly. Justin Williams. Approve. Doug McCoach.
Approve.
Marcia Collins.
Approve.
Honorable Eric Costello.
Approve.
Claudia Jolin.
Approve.
Eric Stevenson.
Approve.
and Sean Davis.
Approve. Our final agenda item.
Our final agenda item tonight is the REACH partnership at Lake Clifton Park and Hartford Heights Building and the Hartford Heights Building Inspire Plan, the adoption of it. Eli, no. Who's presenting? Both of us? Eli present, well, present.
Oh, okay. Do you want to, like, yeah, no, please. Let me just
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, I I might have to go in the middle of the presentation. So I just, if you don't mind, I wanted to just express my 110% support for this plan. The planning department did an amazing job with engaging the community. And I think that what we've outlined here and what they outlined here is not only an excellent plan, but it's also doable. And so I'm just excited about it and just want to ask your support. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Eli Poussin. I'm the Inspire planner working with my colleague Imani Jasper and Marie Anderson, the Eastern and Northern District planners on the REACH Partnership School, and I think it's the REACH Partnership at the Lake Clifton Building and Harford Heights Building Inspire plan to sort of trying to keep the official names consistent with the 21st Century Schools program and sort of how they're trying to thread the needle on this. So, as per sort of knowing that the commission has received that I presented on, you voted on the adoption of the John Rura Inspire Plan just this past June and received a briefing on the Govans Elementary School Inspire Plan. I've sort of foregone a sort of detailed background about the Inspire program overall. But I will note that this is one of just a handful of Inspire plans where the two 21st century school building projects were located so close together that we decided to, that the decision was made to have a combined Inspire planning area that includes the immediate quarter mile, the approximate 5-minute walking distance around each of those 21st century school buildings, but then also looking out to the broader 10-minute walking distance or half-mile buffer around each of the 21st century school buildings as part of the full scope of the area recommendations that are included in the plan that we are taking a look at today. You can see also, just for orientation, the kind of like the planning district takes in the Broadway East and Oliver neighborhood statistical areas at the south and extends up, taking in, I believe, all of Darley Park and most of South Clifton Park, a portion of East Baltimore Midway, and Coldstream Homestead Montebello at the northern end. Probably the landmark, if you're not familiar with either of the schools, could likely be the Gompers Building at North Avenue and Broadway, or the Rita Church Community Center, which are both located within that 5-minute sort of like walking distance area. So the Harford Heights building opened in 2021, a $50 million renovation of an existing 1970s building. While the detailed history I don't think made it into the final plan, I found it of interest that Harford Heights was up through, I believe, the early 1990s, maybe around 1990, one of the citywide magnet programs. And so there were a number of students in the 1980s who were bused to this school facility for as part of the programming there. But it's sort of the school's position within the immediate surrounding context means that the alleys are actually really a critical part of how people sort of travel to the school from the Darley Park neighborhood immediately to the north, and that for students who are coming from the south or other sections of the city, that it does involve sort of being on North Avenue, which of course in the blocks immediately around the school has a pretty high property vacancy rate, both vacant lots and vacant buildings in that immediate vicinity. The REACH partnership with the Lake Clifton building. Oh, one thing just to note also for Harford Heights before I move on is that there are actually 2 programs based within the same school building, which is why you'll hear me refer to it as the Harford Heights building rather than just saying Harford Heights Elementary, is because Sharp Leadenhall Elementary Middle School, which is a school that it's specifically for Baltimore City public school students with, I believe, behavioral disabilities, that they are also based out of the same building. Having relocated, of course, from Sharp Leadenhall when this building opened. The REACH partnership, I believe, moved from the former Lake Clifton site into this building when it opened in 2019. Similarly, a large-scale project of $52 million renovation of a beautiful historic building. The architect on that project was Copland Mock. You can see, like with all of the city high schools, the catchment area for REACH is much larger than it is for any of the elementary middle schools. And so the transit access from Harford Road is a really critical part of how students get to the school. And so Harford, the physical conditions and safety along Harford Road ended up being a big focus of some of the recommendations as we sort of brought that plan forward. The school is also effectively located within Clifton Park, and so Rec and Parks and Baltimore City Public Schools are actually actively working together on a plan to create some improved athletic facilities for students within the context of the park that would also be available when not in use for schools as a public amenity. And so just to briefly note, both schools are quite large relative to other, rather, the elementary school is quite large relative to many other Baltimore City elementary schools. You do see a dip in enrollment around some of the sort of construction period, but it is sort of recovering. And similarly, REACH has been, had, I think, their charter renewed multiple times and really has very strong enrollment. So we are, as with John Burrow, we sort of took a look at the American Community Survey data as a way of digging into the demographics of the planning area, and the area around these schools has a higher share of renters to owners relative to Baltimore City as a whole, and a higher share of public transit users among commuting workers. The sort of commuting for just note this 2021 data is the first year that the American Community Survey is really, by necessity, of course, making a distinction between those workers who do commute and those workers who primarily or exclusively work remote. We have seen, and so as is noted in both the plan and the recommendations, there are really significant issues with vacant and abandoned properties throughout the Inspire area, and this is a consequence of the declining population of this section of East Baltimore over the last several decades. I did want to note that while we're losing population, in part this is a function of smaller households, and so a lot of those are not just like people leave. It's not necessarily that all of the households have left, but each household is a little bit smaller as well. Wrong direction. Am I handing this over to you for this next part? Yes. Okay. Yeah.
So we thought it appropriate to kick over the start of the analysis section to me because I was here for the second part of the expanded outreach that got us to building out some more of these community recommendations. So we're going to time travel back a little bit, going to skip over the basis of the building program because you all have heard this before. So outreach for this plan began in May 2018. There was a kickoff event at Rita Church Rec Center. I was not there. I was defending my exit project in grad school. As the initial outreach period continued, there were several meetings, presentations. There was culminating in 2021 when the draft recommendation report was put out. At that point, the planning department heard back from several community members that their neighborhoods were also touched by this outreach area and felt that they had more input to provide into this process, which ultimately ended up with the planning department having a second round of outreach to reach back out and say, okay, whose feedback did we miss? Not negating the feedback that we got in the first round, but offering up the opportunity to say, is there anything else we need to hear? Is there anything else we need to add? Understanding that community participation in this process is important, particularly if there are going to be community recommendations in this report. So it should say fall 2021, Imani Jasper joins planning department, but it's fine that I didn't make it to this chart. And then I think up in 2022, it should say Eli joins the planning department. So this is when we really dug into that expanded outreach, examining the process and looking back at what partners we can invite elsewhere in East Baltimore. We worked hard, had several meetings to reach out here in the different sections. This is what we have. Does this resonate with you? And almost every time the answer was yes. This one could be more specific. Wanted to make sure you didn't lose this. That's fallen off the radar since this last round of outreach. This has come on, so it really helped us add clarity to a lot of these recommendations. Continued working through last summer, fall, up and through the winter of this year, which is where we have finished the recommendation review with community partners. We've gone through it, and we've ended with a series of recommendations that we are proud to submit today. So in terms of recommendations, each Inspire plan has their primary walking route improvements. They've been completed for this plan, which is partially a function of how long it's been since we started, including new and repainted crosswalks, sidewalk repairs, and 136 street trees planted, which is really great in this area. For the area recommendations, there are 14 strategies under 5 goals and a total of 43 actions, which is substantial, but it does touch, this planning area does, as the diagram Eli showed earlier, touches 6 different neighborhoods, so there's a lot of area and a lot of actions to cover. The table in the plan, which I believe you all have copies of on your tablets, include additional details regarding any other lead or supporting agencies that will be needed for the recommendations. So some of the example strategies, we pulled one from each of them, and now my brain is tickling because the one for Area 4 is not an even number, but I will deal with that on my own time. So these are just some quick examples. You all have all of them in front of you. And then in the recommendations, that's where we dig into a little bit more detail going through, okay, this is better because we switch back and forth between even and odd numbers. My brain is calm now. Great, and so I'm gonna toss it back to Eli to give you some more detail on these recommendations and what the plan covers.
Great, and I mean, in as much that there are 43 distinct recommendations and such a range of these broader strategies within the plan, we thought it would be helpful to just pull out a couple of examples that we thought were particularly important and illustrate the intersection between this Inspire plan and other programs that Baltimore City is already engaged in. And so one of these is the really pressing issue of vacant buildings and vacant property in general in the Darley Park and South Clifton Park neighborhoods, and the need for the Department of Planning to work with the Department of Housing and Community Development to identify resources to increase the scale of vacant property rehabilitation within this area. You can see the sharp increase in the number of vacant building notices issued in 2023, and that's just sort of 2023 to date. So we're comparing 3/4 of a year to a whole year for all of the others. We believe this is driven by a push that DHCD is working to move a whole group of properties within Darley Park into the new in-rem foreclosure process as a way of getting them out of the hands of property owners that are just sitting on them and letting them fall apart, and into the hands of new property owners that will seek out the sort of resources they need to rehabilitate these buildings. And so you can see this is also, and it should be noted, a number of these recommendations are really just kind of like documenting work that is already in progress or has been in progress, but sort of affirming the city's commitment to continue that work to try to yield some results, such as with the seeking a development partner for the large cluster of vacant lots on Perlman Place and Castle Street, for instance. Another example is the recommendation related to the need to improve safety and comfort on Harford Road for people who are, for pedestrians, people who are walking, biking, or using transit in the area. Despite recent traffic calming efforts in that area, which I do believe came about through, in part at least, the Inspire program and the need to improve safety for students at the Reach Partnership High School, it remains effectively a highway sort of cutting through the area that separates residents in East Baltimore Midway and Coldstream Homestead Montebello from Clifton Park on the other side. Sort of like a historical note, the width of Harford Road is due in large part to the fact that it used to include the streetcar right-of-way, which created this sort of green buffer at the park edge, and that when the streetcars were shut down, the sort of tracks were removed, and rather than that land staying as part of the park, it was sort of consolidated back into the roadway itself. And so you can see this sort of like really improving, having effective traffic calming and improving safety along Harford Road, we think is also key to seeing sort of expanded residential reuse and commercial activity that can provide the kinds of amenities and services that residents in the area are looking for from this kind of like neighborhood, what could potentially be a very desirable neighborhood commercial district, but currently really is not functioning in that way. The last recommendation that we wanted to highlight, which was a subject of discussion just this morning with the Baltimore City Department of Recreation and Parks, is with regard to Morgan State University's completion of the transfer of, I believe it's around 60 acres of land at a former Lake Clifton site in Clifton Park to the city, and the need for Rec and Parks, DOT, and Morgan State University to work together to really plan and prioritize capital improvements to that space. So we've got also recommendations related to traffic calming in Clifton Park. This is something that DOT is already working on as the recent addition of a protected bike lane on St. Lo Drive, a requirement under the Complete Streets Manual, is sort of like has already kind of kicked off some of these efforts even before the plan has been adopted. So regarding the equity analysis, we do believe that the long-term impacts of the adoption of this plan would hopefully be beneficial. It's sort of increased access to improved park facilities, reductions in crashes following traffic calming, and improved quality of life for existing residents, and that this effort overall could enhance sort of the broader effort to reduce existing patterns of inequity in Baltimore City. We also feel like as the sort of I guess 5-year-long formal engagement process for this plan illustrates that we have had meaningful opportunities to discuss this proposal with neighbors, and notably that Darley Park and South Clifton Park are two neighborhoods where there has not been, to my knowledge, ever any kind of urban renewal plan or area master plan previously. And so this is kind of fulfilling both sort of increasing equity in terms of our provision of community planning services to all parts of the city, but also sort of fulfilling this overall goal for the Inspire program, where it is bringing us into neighborhoods where we are not necessarily have not necessarily been working with residents as directly in the past. And so our recommendation is for approval and adoption of the plan, but welcome any questions or comments from the commission.
Thank you very much. Great presentation. Starting off with Commissioner Collins. Any questions for Eli and Ronnie?
Thank you very much for this presentation. I had a chance to read through the plan. I'm struck a little bit by the last plan we were discussing on York Road and the role that a wide street plays in making a walkable community. That was also a community that was using the alleyways as a means of getting from point A to point B. So obviously these are where we've had these really wide roadways, and thank you for explaining why it's so wide. You know, it's really important for these communities to be able to get from one side to the other. And I hope that we have some success in that regard, because it just helps knit the communities back together. I had the opportunity to walk around Darley Park early on with Mayor Scott's community walks early in his tenure, and I was just struck by this lovely little community of beautiful little row houses, and just the dotting of people who were, you know, just very proud of their properties and had gardens. And, you know, that's the kind of support these folks need, who are, you know, dedicated to their communities, had lived there, many of them had lived there for 30 or 40 years. And, you know, they're just kind of tucked away. And for me, visually, I was just so overwhelmed with the roadway that it was really hard to see these communities. So I just appreciate all the work that you did. I appreciate the fact that you took the time to go back out into the community and to reach out to Darley Park. And I just was very impressed with the plan. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Collins. Vice Chair Stevenson.
No questions. Great plan. Congrats to both of you for your hard work.
Commissioner Tillman.
No questions, thank you.
Deputy Mayor Williams.
I remember on one of the plans, or one of the schematics that called out the Gompers building.
Yes.
Do we call for any specific or ideas of what the use could or should be?
I don't believe it gets into specifics. I think the recommendation is related to supporting efforts to rehab the Gompers building, because it is directly across the street from the elementary school. I had a family member of a student told me when I was at Hartford Heights that she's like personally put anointing oil on the building and prayed for it. So that's to call out that it is of serious concern and value to the neighborhood that something happened at that building. So that recommendation is related to supporting it. Efforts, plans, projects to rehab that building. I'll also say while I'm up here and have the mic that since this has been one of the longer Inspire plans, I brought cake for when we are finished with this item. So
I saw that cake and I was like, who brought that? Just don't let, Councilman Costello near it with his Chick-fil-A sauce. Question, I'm sorry.
I have a quick question. Is it true that there's a covenant on the Gompers building restricting residential
there
development?
is a HUD covenant, deed restriction, preventing residential reuse of the building. I believe HCD is in conversations with HUD about getting that restriction removed. I'm unaware of what movement, if any, there has been in that item to date.
There's a nice little bit on it in the report that talks about, the joint marketing of it and whatnot. It outlines the HUD.
It's also a location that's been called out in the Broadway East Impact Investment Area strategy, and has also come up as an item of concern during the North Avenue Links discussion. So it's bringing together some items that have been mentioned in other plans as well that overlap in the area.
It is one, I think the fact that this overlaps with 3 impact investment areas sort of made us very conscious of the fact that the sort of like more detailed level planning of like what's the appropriate use for the Gompers building or what would the market support in this particular location, that may be, that the impact investment area work group would likely be a more effective venue for those kinds of conversations and analysis to move forward, in that we could play a role of supporting the implementation of something like the identification of a use and a development partner for the Gompers building in partnership with DHCD, rather than taking on the responsibility for that kind of analysis within this plan, in as much that we're not going to have the authority, it's not going to be Imani's role or my role to sort of like push that. Yeah.
So, going back over.
Yeah, well, I'm just, for discussion, I'm thinking how massive of a project it would be to do something with it, and probably have to be university or universities and maybe the school systems working together on something. Because it's a beautiful building, we gotta do something, but it's a lot to take on. So,
Going back, Councilman Costello, did you have any questions for?
No, sir.
Okay, great. Commissioner McCoach?
I have no questions, but I would compliment you. I've driven this corridor for 40 years, and particularly at the corner of 25th Street, which is the heart of this Inspire location, this is a place that can thrive with necessary planning investment. So, thumbs up.
Lastly, we had an opportunity to talk beforehand, and this is probably the most ambitious Inspire plan the Commission's ever seen, which I think is great. It is involving a lot more than just pedestrian, student pathways to the school, and how do we improve those. There's a lot in here. Quite frankly, there's a hell of a lot in here. And the only thing that concerns me, let me step back. You guys did a great job. You did a great job under really weird circumstances where you came in as the bus was already halfway down the road and probably still moving, and you jumped on and you brought it to fruition. So thank you very, very much for all of your hard work. And the report is great. I've got a copy of it, which I've, provided my comments. I'll give it to you afterwards so you can incorporate just minor stuff here and there, nothing substantive. But the one substantive thing I have is under the plan implementation summary, it says the Department of Planning, community stakeholders and others should continuously refer to this section to hold the city responsible to commitments made in this plan. And I agree with that 100% when we know what we're committing to. And unfortunately, the recommendations that are here, which are extensive, don't have any funding associated with them. And so I'm personally concerned about saying, okay, we're gonna hold you responsible for this, but we have no idea how much this is gonna cost. So I would recommend that we consider at some point maybe an amendment to that sentence that says to hold the city responsible for the commitments made in this plan once funding is identified and agreed to. Okay, that gives everybody an opportunity. It puts the impetus back on people to say, okay, how much is this gonna cost? As opposed to just great visions, which are fantastic, but how much is it gonna cost to implement this? And then we commit to it. Is that fair?
Yes, that sounds
Makes sense to me.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this? I am absolutely shocked that the community has not packed this room, because that is a very,
More
very
people
active.
out. But I think they were a little tired before. When Amani and I sort of got on the bus, there were a lot of tired people on the bus.
There's a lot of people napping.
They were walking initially, and then the bus, sort of one of those the bus didn't come, and so you try to walk to the next stop, hoping it'll pick you up. I think it was one of those scenarios.
That's perfect. All right, seeing as there's no one else in the public who'd like to speak, let's close the public hearing. Any discussion, comments from the commission? Hearing none, do I have a motion?
Motion to approve?
Do I have a second?
Second.
The only thing that I would ask is that we include an amendment that would include that amendment in the plan that says we have to identify how much it's gonna cost and agree to that before we commit to it. Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, no, we're comfortable with
Yes.
this. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, semantics.
Sorry.
A really important one, but, all right, and Councilman Costello, are you comfortable with that as the second of the motion?
Yes, I am. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Secretary, will you call roll?
Justin Williams,
Approve.
Doug McCoach,
Approve.
Marcia Collins,
Proof is amended.
Eric Costello,
Approve as amended.
Claudia Jolin,
Approve.
Eric Stevenson,
Approve?
and Sean Davis.
Approve. Thank you all very much. With that, I call our meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much.